The mansion was enormous, surrounded by high walls and gates that gleamed in the morning sun. Its gardens were perfect, with flowers that looked like they had been painted by an artist, and the marble floors inside shone so brightly that they reflected the chandeliers hanging above. Inside, the life of luxury was obvious in every corner. Expensive furniture, rare artworks, and gold-plated decorations gave the house a feeling of grandeur that few people had the chance to see in their lifetime. But behind all this beauty lived a man who was feared as much as he was respected. He was a wealthy tycoon, known for his sharp mind and sharper temper. He had everything one could imagine: a big house, fast cars, expensive clothes, and endless money. But he had little patience for people who didn't meet his expectations, and he often liked to test those around him, sometimes in ways that made others feel small or insignificant. Among the many people working in the mansion was a young woman who was quiet, kind, and extremely humble. She had been hired as a maid, responsible for cleaning the vast rooms, dusting the expensive furniture, and making sure that everything looked perfect at all times. She moved silently through the corridors, careful not to disturb anyone, and worked with a dedication that often went unnoticed. Most people in the house barely knew her, and even those who did rarely paid much attention to her presence. She wore simple clothes and rarely spoke unless spoken to, but there was something about her calm and gentle nature that made her different from anyone else in the mansion. She had a quiet strength, a patience that seemed endless, and a soft smile that she shared only when she felt comfortable. One sunny morning, she was working in the music room, one of the most beautiful rooms in the house. The walls were lined with paintings, the windows let in soft light, and in the center of the room sat a grand piano, its polished black surface shining like glass. She loved that piano, though she never had a chance to play it freely. Sometimes when the room was empty, she would stand beside it, imagining the melodies she could create, moving her fingers in the air as if she were playing. Music had always been her secret friend. Even though she had never performed in front of anyone, she had taught herself to play from books she had borrowed, listening to music and copying what she heard. It had been a private joy, a way to escape the demands of life, a world where only the sound mattered and no one judged her. The tycoon had been walking through the mansion that morning, his sharp eyes inspecting everything. He noticed her humming softly while dusting the piano, a melody so gentle that it seemed to float in the air. At first he thought nothing of it, assuming it was just a maid entertaining herself. But then a mischievous idea entered his mind. He liked to play little games to see how people reacted under pressure. He called her over, his voice firm and commanding. She looked up, startled, her hands pausing in mid-air. The man rarely spoke, directly to her, and when he did, it was usually to give orders or criticize. "You," he said, pointing at her, "play that piano. I want to hear what you can do." She froze for a moment, feeling a cold shiver run down her spine. She had never performed for anyone, and certainly not for him. Her heart began to race, and her hands trembled slightly. She wanted to refuse, but she knew that refusing him would not end well. She nodded quietly, her face turning a light shade of pink, and walked toward the piano. Every step she took felt heavy, as if the weight of everyone's expectations pressed down on her. The tycoon's friends and staff had gathered in the room, curious to see what would happen. They whispered among themselves, some laughing softly, expecting a disaster. They knew the maid had no formal training, no experience playing in front of an audience, and they assumed this would be amusing. As she reached the piano, she took a deep breath and positioned her hands over the keys. She tried to calm her racing heart, telling herself that she could do it, that music had always been her companion. But the room felt enormous, the walls closing in with the weight of so many eyes watching her. She could hear the tycoon's smirk, his silent amusement as he waited for her to fail. The air was tense, a mixture of expectation, curiosity, and quiet laughter. She could feel the energy in the room pressing down on her, a challenge that seemed impossible to overcome. Despite the pressure, she closed her eyes for a moment and remembered why she loved music. She remembered the evenings when she would play for hours in her small home, the feeling of freedom as her fingers danced across the keys, the joy of creating something beautiful from nothing. That memory gave her a tiny spark of courage. She opened her eyes, placed her hands firmly on the piano, and let the first notes flow. At first, they were soft, almost hesitant, but there was a clarity in them, a purity that made the room fall silent. The Tycoon's smirk faltered, replaced by a slight frown of surprise. His friends leaned forward, unsure of what they were hearing. The music was unlike anything they expected. It was gentle yet strong, delicate yet confident. Every note seemed to carry emotion, telling a story that words could never express. The maid's fingers moved with a fluidity that was astonishing, as if they knew exactly where to go, guided by some invisible force. The melody filled the room, wrapping around everyone like a warm embrace. People who had come to see her fail found themselves completely captivated. The sound of the piano transformed the atmosphere. The laughter and whispers vanished, replaced by awe and admiration. Even the Tycoon, who had intended to humiliate her, could not look away. His eyes widened slightly, his lips pressed together in disbelief. He had expected a clumsy performance, maybe a few wrong notes and nervous pauses. But what he heard was the work of someone with real talent, someone who had poured her heart into every movement of her hands. The maid continued to play, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm, her expression focused but serene. She did not look at anyone, not even the Tycoon. She was lost in the music, in the joy of creating something that touched the hearts of those around her. The room seemed to disappear, leaving only the sound of the piano and the emotions it carried. It was as if the mansion, with all its wealth and grandeur, had vanished, leaving behind a simple truth. Talent could come from anywhere, and true beauty could appear where it was least expected. By the time she finished, the room was completely silent for a moment. No one moved, no one spoke. It was a silence filled with respect, amazement, and a little disbelief. The maid slowly lifted her hands from the keys, her fingers lingering in the air as if reluctant to leave the music behind. She looked around, feeling a mixture of relief and nervousness, unsure how everyone would react now. The Tycoon, who had been ready to mock her, was speechless. His eyes were wide, and for the first time there was no hint of arrogance in his expression. He had been proven wrong in the most unexpected way. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had paused. The grandeur of the mansion, the expectations of the wealthy, the judgments of the staff, all of it faded in the face of raw, undeniable talent. The maid, once invisible in the world of wealth and power, had commanded the attention of everyone simply by being herself and allowing her skill to shine. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder that greatness often hides in the most humble places, waiting for the right time to reveal itself. When she finally stood up, there were a few hesitant claps at first, followed by louder applause as everyone realized how extraordinary her performance had been. The Tycoon's friends looked at each other in surprise, some shaking their heads, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. And the Tycoon himself, though still trying to maintain a semblance of authority, could not hide the admiration in his eyes. He had learned a lesson that morning. Never underestimate someone based on their appearance or position. True talent, once revealed, demanded respect, and there was no hiding from it. That day marked the beginning of a change. The maid had stepped into a new light, and even though she remained humble, her life inside the mansion would never be the same. The music room, once just a place of duty and cleaning, had become a place of magic, a place where she had proven her worth without saying a single word. And the Tycoon, who had set out to humiliate her, had discovered something far more valuable, a rare and extraordinary gift that had the power to move hearts and silence even the most cynical of critics. From that morning onward, the maid's quiet strength and hidden talent became impossible to ignore. People in the mansion began to see her in a different way, and the world of wealth and power, which had always seemed so distant and intimidating, had suddenly become a place where her music could shine. She had faced fear, pressure, and judgment, and she had emerged victorious not with arrogance but with grace, humility, and an undeniable brilliance that no one could deny. The silence that followed her performance was filled with a strange mixture of wonder and disbelief. For a few moments, no one dared to speak. The maid standing near the piano felt her hands trembling slightly as if the energy of the room had passed through her fingers and left a lingering warmth. She had expected ridicule, perhaps a few nervous laughs or scolding words, but instead, she was met with admiration. People's eyes were wide, their mouths slightly open, and the Tycoon, who had been so confident in his plan to humiliate her, looked like he had seen something he could not explain. The first person to break the silence was one of the Tycoon's friends. He clapped slowly, hesitantly at first, unsure if he should really acknowledge the beauty of what he had just heard. Then others joined in, their applause growing louder and more genuine. The maid lowered her eyes, feeling a blush rise in her cheeks. She wasn't used to attention, especially not this kind of attention, and the applause made her feel both proud and self-conscious. She wanted to say something, perhaps a simple "thank you," but the words seemed too small to carry the meaning of what had just happened. The Tycoon remained standing near the back of the room, his arms crossed. His eyes followed her every movement, not with the cold calculation he usually showed, but with curiosity and amazement. He had never seen anyone like her before. People in his world were often loud, showy, and eager to impress him, but she was different. She had not sought his approval. She had not tried to gain attention, and yet she had achieved something extraordinary. That realization unsettled him. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of humility creeping in, a recognition that talent and skill could exist in places he had never thought to look. He finally spoke, his voice low, but steady. "I did not expect that," he said, the words strange on his tongue. He was not used to admitting surprise, and even less used to admitting that he had been wrong. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The maid hesitated. She had never shared her story with anyone in the mansion, and the thought of revealing it to him felt strange. I taught myself," she said softly. "I have always loved music. I practice when I can." Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, but it carried a sincerity that could not be ignored. The Tycoon stared at her for a moment, trying to measure whether she was boasting or exaggerating, but her calm demeanor convinced him that she was telling the truth. His mind raced. How could someone who appeared so ordinary possess such incredible skill? It went against everything he thought he knew about talent, effort, and opportunity. In his world, people were trained, groomed, and polished, often from childhood. To reach the level of excellence she displayed effortlessly. Yet here she was, a humble maid, commanding a grand piano with grace and precision, moving her fingers as if they were extensions of her own soul. He motioned for her to sit again at the piano. "Play something else," he said, this time without the mocking tone he had used before. There was curiosity in his voice, genuine curiosity, mixed with a trace of excitement. He wanted to understand how she could create such music, how someone so ordinary could produce sounds so extraordinary. The maid looked at him surprised. She had expected punishment or mockery, not encouragement. She nodded slowly, settling back onto the piano bench, her fingers hovering over the keys. This time she allowed herself to play freely, without hesitation. The notes came more confidently, flowing in a melody that was richer and more complex than before. Each chord resonated with emotion, telling a story without words. It was as if the music itself was speaking, conveying feelings of longing, hope, and quiet strength. The audience in the room leaned forward, drawn into the story she was telling. Even the Tycoon felt a strange sense of calm wash over him, a rare moment of peace in a life usually filled with ambition and control. As she played, she closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. She had spent years learning not just the technical aspects of playing, but also the language of emotion that music required. She had practiced in secret, in small rooms, on a worn-out keyboard, imagining audiences and feeling the thrill of creating something beautiful. All that practice, all those quiet hours alone had led to this moment. The grandeur of the mansion and the wealth of the people around her could not match the richness of the music she created with her heart. The Tycoon's friends whispered among themselves, astonished. They had thought they were watching a simple amusement, expecting awkward mistakes and embarrassment. Instead, they were witnessing talent so pure and compelling that it demanded attention. Some of them had never seen someone play with such feeling, and the contrast between her humble appearance and the brilliance of her performance made the experience even more remarkable. They realized that they had been judging her too quickly, assuming that appearances and social status could predict skill or worth. As the melody continued, the Tycoon felt a strange mix of emotions. He was humbled, yes, but also inspired. He realized that he had been wrong to think that power and wealth could guarantee talent or even understanding. Here was someone who had overcome obstacles he could not even imagine, who had devoted herself to something she loved without seeking recognition or reward. Her dedication and passion had produced something extraordinary, and it reminded him that life often held surprises for those who were willing to look beyond the surface. The maid played for what felt like hours, though in reality it was only a few minutes. Each note was deliberate yet effortless, reflecting not only skill but also the depth of her understanding of music. She did not rush, she did not show off. She simply allowed the piano to speak through her. The room, once filled with expectation and judgment, was now filled with admiration and awe. Guests who had come to watch a spectacle found themselves moved in ways they had not anticipated. Some felt tears prick their eyes, while others simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process the beauty before them. When she finally finished, there was a pause, a collective intake of breath. The sound lingered in the air, leaving an impression that would not fade easily. Slowly, the applause began, hesitant at first, then growing louder and more enthusiastic. The maid stood, bowing her head slightly, still unsure how to respond to the overwhelming attention. Her heart was racing, but this time it was not from fear. It was from the thrill of having shared something she loved and having it received with respect and admiration. The Tycoon walked toward her. His expression softened. "You have remarkable talent," he said, carefully choosing his words. "I thought I could embarrass you, but instead you have amazed everyone." His voice carried a mix of respect and wonder, and for the first time, the maid saw him without the usual arrogance or pride. She nodded politely, her modesty preventing her from boasting or seeking praise. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady now, reflecting the confidence that came from being recognized for her gift. From that moment, the dynamic in the room shifted. The Tycoon's friends looked at her with new eyes, and even the staff who had worked alongside her for years seemed to notice her presence more clearly. She had shown them that talent and passion could not be measured by status, that greatness could be found in the most unexpected places. The experience also gave her a quiet sense of validation, a confirmation that her years of secret practice and dedication had been worthwhile. She realized that her music had power, the power to move hearts and challenge assumptions. Afterward, the Tycoon invited her to play for him again, not to mock her, but to learn more about her abilities. He wanted to understand how someone with such limited resources had cultivated such remarkable skill. The maid agreed cautiously at first, but she soon found herself playing with more freedom and joy than ever before. She felt a sense of belonging in a world that had previously seemed closed to her, and she began to see that her talent could open doors she had never imagined. The room, once a place of fear and expectation, had transformed into a space of possibility. The music had broken down barriers, revealing the humanity and potential in everyone present. The maid's courage and skill had created a ripple effect, inspiring those around her and challenging their assumptions. Even the Tycoon who had set out to humiliate her had been changed by the experience, learning a valuable lesson about humility, respect, and the unexpected sources of greatness. That day marked a turning point, not only for the maid, but also for everyone who witnessed her performance. It was a reminder that talent often hides in quiet, unnoticed places, and that the courage to reveal it can have profound effects. The mansion, with all its wealth and grandeur, had witnessed a moment of genuine human achievement, and the memory of her music would linger in the hearts of those present for years to come. The maid walked away from the piano, her steps lighter than before. She had faced fear, pressure, and the weight of expectation, and she had emerged stronger, more confident, and recognized for her abilities. The world of luxury and power, once intimidating and distant, had begun to open up to her, not because of wealth or status, but because of her talent, her dedication, and the courage to share her gift. The Tycoon watched her leave the room, a sense of respect and curiosity settling over him. He had learned something invaluable, that greatness cannot be measured by appearances, that skill and passion often thrive in silence, and that humility can hide the most extraordinary gifts. For the maid, the future suddenly seemed full of possibilities, and the music room, once just a place for work, had become a space where her dreams could begin to unfold. After that morning, the atmosphere in the mansion changed in ways no one could have predicted. The maid, once a quiet shadow moving through the grand halls, began to be noticed more and more. People whispered among themselves, curious about the young woman who had captivated everyone with her piano. Even those who had once dismissed her now watched her quietly, waiting to see what she might do next. Yet she remained humble, moving through her daily duties with the same calm efficiency as always. She never let the attention distract her from her work. But she could feel a quiet pride growing within her, a pride that came not from praise, but from the knowledge that she had shared a piece of herself with the world and had been recognized for it. The Tycoon, who had intended to embarrass her, found himself thinking about her constantly. He would catch glimpses of her moving through the mansion, her hands neatly folded, her back straight, and her eyes quietly observing the world around her. There was something about the way she carried herself, a mix of confidence and humility that intrigued him. He had never met anyone who could both command attention without demanding it and remain so composed under pressure. The memory of the music room that morning stayed with him, echoing in his mind like the very notes she had played. He realized that he had learned a lesson he did not expect. True talent could not be forced, and greatness could not be measured by appearances alone. A few days later, he called her to the music room again. This time his tone was different. It lacked the mocking edge it had carried before. Instead, there was a hint of curiosity, almost like a teacher wanting to understand a gifted student. "Sit at the piano," he said simply. She approached cautiously, aware that this could be another test, but also curious about his intentions. She took her place on the bench, her hands resting lightly on the keys. He stood a few steps back, silent, watching her carefully. She began to play, letting the music flow naturally. This time it was not about proving herself or responding to the expectations of others. She played because she loved the sound, because the piano had always been a part of her life, a friend she could rely on when the world felt too heavy. The notes filled the room, carrying emotion and depth that went far beyond technical skill. Each chord seemed to tell a story, each pause a breath of life. The Tycoon listened, utterly captivated, feeling something stir deep within him. He had heard music before, of course, performed by professionals in grand halls, but nothing had touched him like this. There was a purity and honesty to her playing that no trained musician could replicate. As she continued, he began to understand the depth of her talent. It was not simply about skill or practice. It was about heart, about the ability to connect with people through music. He realized that her years of quiet dedication, spent learning and perfecting her craft in secret, had given her something rare, the power to move others without saying a word. He could see now why she had captivated the room that first morning. It was not just the music itself, but the emotion behind it, the soul she poured into every note. Guests who had once come to watch and laugh now listened in awe. They could feel the music vibrating in their chests, tugging at emotions they hadn't expected to confront. Some closed their eyes, allowing themselves to be carried away by the sound. Others leaned forward, trying to catch every note, every nuance, marveling at the control and feeling she demonstrated. It was as if the room itself had become a living entity, breathing with the rhythm of her performance. Even the staff who had known her for years found themselves seeing her in a new light. The maid they had once overlooked was now a presence impossible to ignore. For the Tycoon, the effect was even stronger. He had always believed that wealth and influence were the ultimate measures of power, that respect could be demanded and talent could be bought or trained. Yet here was someone who possessed power of a completely different kind, the power to touch hearts, to command attention, and to inspire awe. It humbled him, challenged him, and fascinated him all at once. He could not look away, and for the first time he did not want to. He wanted to understand her, to know what drove her, to see if he could glimpse the source of her remarkable gift. The maid finished her piece, letting the last notes linger in the air before slowly lifting her hands from the keys. The room remained quiet for a moment, as if no one wanted to break the spell. Then, as if released from some invisible tension, the applause began. This time it was louder, warmer, more genuine than before. She bowed her head slightly, acknowledging it with the humility that had always been her nature. She did not seek the applause, yet she felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her music had touched the people around her. The Tycoon stepped forward. "Your music. It's unlike anything I have ever heard," he said. There was no trace of mockery in his voice, only honesty and wonder. "I thought I knew everything about talent, but you have shown me how little I truly understood. You have a gift, and it should not be hidden." His words were sincere, and for the first time the maid felt a sense of recognition that went beyond simple praise. It was acknowledgement from someone who had power, influence, and the authority to open doors that had previously seemed closed. She smiled faintly, unsure what to say. "I only play because I love it," she replied. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I never expected anyone to care." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of years spent in quiet practice, of hours devoted to music with no audience, no reward, only the joy of creation. The Tycoon nodded, understanding more than she realized. He had learned that sometimes the most profound talent comes not from ambition or recognition, but from a love for what one does, pursued quietly and sincerely. Over the next few weeks, her reputation within the mansion grew. People began to ask her to play for small gatherings, initially out of curiosity, then out of genuine admiration. Each time she played with the same dedication and sincerity, never performing for attention, never seeking approval. And each time she left the audience in awe. Even the Tycoon, who had first intended to humiliate her, began to look forward to her performances. They were no longer tests or challenges. They were moments of beauty that broke the monotony of wealth and power, moments that reminded everyone that life could still surprise and delight them. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, the Tycoon asked her to sit with him in the music room. It was rare for him to seek the company of someone he did not consider a peer, yet there was something about her presence that drew him in. They spoke quietly, not as master and servant, but as two people connected by the power of music. He asked her about her training, her inspirations, and her dreams. She shared what she could, speaking honestly about the hours of practice, the books she had studied, and the melodies that had lived in her mind for years. He listened intently, fascinated by her story, realizing that she had achieved more than many professional musicians, yet without recognition or guidance. Through these conversations, he began to see her not just as a talented musician, but as a person with depth, intelligence, and quiet strength. He admired her humility, the way she had carried herself despite the world's assumptions and limitations. He began to consider ways to help her, to give her opportunities that might have been impossible otherwise. He realized that talent like hers deserved a stage, a chance to be heard far beyond the walls of the mansion. The maid, meanwhile, continued to move through her daily life with grace and humility. She never allowed the attention to change her, never let admiration turn into arrogance. She remained the same gentle, hard-working woman she had always been, but there was a new confidence in her steps, a new light in her eyes. She knew her life had shifted, that the music room was no longer just a place of duty but a space of possibility. She had proven to herself and to others that her gift was real, powerful, and capable of inspiring even the most skeptical hearts. Her relationship with the Tycoon also began to shift. He no longer saw her as someone to be tested or mocked. Instead, he saw her as a partner in the world of music, someone whose talent and insight could enrich the lives of those around her. He found himself seeking her opinion, inviting her to play at gatherings, and even asking for her guidance on the emotional impact of certain pieces. It was a remarkable change, and one that surprised everyone in the mansion. The power dynamics that had once defined their interactions had been replaced by mutual respect and admiration, all because of her courage, skill, and the beauty of her music. As the weeks passed, the maid began to experiment with more complex pieces, challenging herself and exploring the full range of her abilities. The Tycoon and the guests watched in amazement as she transformed familiar melodies into something entirely new, adding her own interpretations and emotions. Each performance was unique, reflecting not only her skill but also her heart and creativity. She had become more than a maid who played the piano. She had become an artist, a creator, and an inspiration to everyone who witnessed her talent. Through it all, she remained grounded. She never forgot the quiet hours of practice alone in her room, the small victories and failures that had shaped her into the musician she had become. She understood that talent was not just about skill, but about perseverance, humility, and the willingness to share one's gift without expectation. And in doing so, she transformed the lives of those around her. reminding them that true greatness often emerges from the most unexpected places. The music room, once a space of silence and routine, had become a sanctuary of emotion, beauty, and inspiration. The maid's playing had created a ripple effect, changing the way people saw her, the mansion, and even themselves. And as she continued to play, each note carried the promise of new possibilities. A reminder that courage, dedication, and love for what one does can change not only a life, but the hearts of those who witness it. The days in the mansion began to carry a different rhythm. The maid, who had once moved quietly through the halls, was no longer invisible. The staff, the guests, and even the Tycoon himself had begun to notice the subtle changes in her presence. People would pause when she walked by, some glancing with curiosity, others with admiration. Her talent had created a quiet respect that no one could ignore, even those who were accustomed to power and wealth. The piano had become more than a piece of furniture in the grand music room. It had become a place of transformation, a place where the ordinary became extraordinary, where humility and skill could command attention without any effort. One afternoon, the Tycoon invited a small group of influential friends to the mansion. These were people accustomed to entertainment of a very different kind, expensive shows, grand orchestras, and professional performances. They were wealthy, powerful, and often impatient, used to being impressed by displays of skill carefully curated and rehearsed. When they arrived, the Tycoon, with a quiet smile, led them to the music room. "You must hear her," he said, gesturing toward the maid who was already standing by the piano. The guests looked at her with polite curiosity, some even hiding a hint of amusement. They assumed she would play like a beginner, perhaps stumble through a few notes and provide a moment of light entertainment. They did not expect the depth, precision, or emotion that was about to unfold. The maid took her seat, placing her fingers lightly on the keys, and closed her eyes. For a moment the room held its breath. Then, as her hands began to move, a melody unlike anything they had heard filled the space. The music was flowing, intricate, yet effortless. Each note seemed carefully chosen, not just technically perfect but filled with feeling. The guests, initially skeptical, found themselves leaning forward, captivated. Some gasped at the subtlety of her phrasing. Others smiled as the music seemed to evoke memories and emotions they had long forgotten. Even the Tycoon standing at the back felt his heart stir. He had never seen someone command such attention without a word, without any attempt to impress through wealth or status. Her talent was genuine, raw, and impossible to ignore. As she continued, the audience became completely absorbed. The room, once filled with polite conversation and quiet laughter, had transformed into a silent space of shared emotion. People who had come with a sense of superiority, certain that they would be unimpressed, now sat in awe, completely humbled by the beauty of the music. The maid's performance was more than just skill. It was storytelling through sound, conveying feelings of joy, sorrow, hope, and longing. Each chord resonated deeply, touching the hearts of everyone present. The Tycoon watched closely, his expression unreadable at first, but slowly changing as the performance went on. He had expected a simple display, perhaps a moment of amusement to share with his friends. Instead, he was witnessing a transformation, not just in the way others perceived the maid, but in how he himself felt. The pride he usually carried, the arrogance that came with wealth and authority, had given way to a deep respect. He realized that he had underestimated her, as he had underestimated so many things in life, and that humility, talent, and dedication could create power far stronger than money. By the time she finished, the room was silent again, the music lingering in the air like a soft echo. For a moment no one moved, no one spoke. The spell she had cast was complete. Then slowly the applause began, first tentative, then growing louder and more enthusiastic. The guests rose to their feet, some clapping until their hands were sore, others wiping tears from their eyes. The maid, though shy and reserved, allowed herself a small, polite bow, acknowledging the admiration without pride. She did not seek recognition, but she had earned it in the most undeniable way. The Tycoon stepped forward, his eyes fixed on her with a mixture of admiration and amazement. "You are extraordinary," he said, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I wanted to see if I could catch you off guard, but instead you have shown me something far more valuable. Talent like yours deserves to be seen and heard by the world." The maid looked at him quietly, her expression calm. She had never sought the attention of the powerful, never tried to impress, yet here she was, recognized not for her position but for her abilities and the heart she put into her music. Following that evening, her life began to shift in ways she could never have imagined. People in the mansion started to seek her out, asking her to play for small gatherings, for private moments where music could change the mood, ease tension, or celebrate joy. Each time she played, she did so with the same sincerity and care, never performing for applause, never seeking recognition, only for the love of music itself. And each time the effect was profound. Guests were moved, staff were inspired, and the Tycoon, who had once thought to use her for amusement, found himself supporting her, facilitating opportunities that would have been impossible before. The Maid began to understand that her talent carried power, not in the sense of wealth or influence, but in the ability to touch people's hearts. She learned that her music could bridge gaps, soften attitudes, and create understanding where words often failed. People who had been cold, distant, or judgmental found themselves smiling, even tearing up as they listened to her play. Her piano had become a tool of connection, bringing together those who might otherwise remain separated by social barriers, ego, or assumption. The Tycoon, observing her growth and influence, felt a shift in himself as well. He realized that power was not only about commanding respect through wealth or authority, but also about recognizing and nurturing talent in unexpected places. He began to invite her to perform more often, sometimes for private friends, sometimes for important business gatherings, always emphasizing her music's value, not as entertainment, but as something extraordinary that could move people profoundly. He encouraged her to experiment with more complex pieces, to add her own creativity, and to explore the full range of her abilities. She approached these challenges with the same calm determination that had always defined her. She practiced in quiet moments, often staying late in the music room after her daily duties were done. Her fingers danced across the keys with confidence, exploring melodies that had lived in her imagination for years but had never been fully realized. Each performance was unique, reflecting her emotions, her experiences, and her understanding of the world around her. The music she created was alive, vibrant, and impossible to ignore. Word of her talent began to spread beyond the mansion. Friends of the Tycoon, impressed by what they had heard, spoke about her in social circles. Some suggested professional training. Others proposed public performances, and a few even offered mentorship from renowned musicians. The Maid, however, remained grounded, careful to balance the excitement of recognition with the humility that had always been her guiding principle. She understood that talent was not just about skill or recognition. It was about dedication, practice, and the willingness to share something meaningful without expectation. One evening, the Tycoon asked her to perform for a small, intimate gathering of his closest friends. The room was filled with influential people, accustomed to luxury and spectacle. They had never encountered someone like her, someone who could command attention and stir emotion purely through music, without theatrics or grandeur. As she played, the effect was immediate. The guests, expecting a polite performance, found themselves moved, challenged, and inspired. They realized that true skill and passion were not determined by wealth or position, but by dedication and heart. The performance that evening marked a turning point. The Maid was no longer just a talented musician within the walls of the mansion. She had become a presence impossible to ignore, a person whose abilities and character commanded respect. Her music had the power to change perceptions, influence moods, and create connection. The Tycoon, who had once sought to humble her, now looked at her with pride, support, and admiration. He had learned that true greatness could not be imposed or bought. It had to be recognized, nurtured, and respected. Through it all, the Maid remained herself. She did not let attention or admiration change her. She continued her daily tasks with the same diligence and care, maintaining the quiet strength that had always defined her. Yet there was a new light in her eyes, a sense of possibility that had never existed before. She understood that her life had changed, that her music could open doors and touch lives in ways she had only dreamed of. And she approached this new chapter with grace, humility, and a commitment to continue sharing her gift with the world. The mansion itself seemed to change around her. The music room, once a place of routine and work, had become a sanctuary of creativity, expression, and connection. The people who spent time there found themselves influenced by her presence. Their attitudes softened, their minds opened. The maid had shown them that talent could exist anywhere, that greatness could come from the most unexpected places, and that humility, dedication, and passion were qualities that could inspire even the most powerful. And through it all, the Tycoon watched, learning lessons he could not have imagined. He saw the impact of genuine talent, the value of encouragement, and the importance of recognizing potential in places where it might otherwise be overlooked. He began to support her ambitions quietly, providing resources, encouragement, and guidance not to control her, but to ensure that her gift reached as many people as possible. His initial desire to humiliate her had been transformed into admiration, respect, and a commitment to nurture something rare and extraordinary. Time moved forward in the mansion, but the memory of that first morning when the maid had played the piano never faded. Her talent had already begun to transform the lives of those around her, but now it was starting to change her own life in ways she had never imagined. She continued her daily work, carrying out her duties with the same humility and care, but there was a quiet confidence in her steps and a soft light in her eyes. She had faced fear, expectation, and judgment and had come through stronger. The piano had become not just a source of joy, but a gateway to a new world she had only dreamed of before. The Tycoon had become more than an observer of her talent. He had become a supporter. He began arranging opportunities for her that she could never have imagined on her own. He invited professional musicians to the mansion to hear her play. He spoke to influential people in the city about her skill, and he even suggested that she receive formal training. The maid was hesitant at first. She had always relied on her own practice and intuition, and the idea of professional instruction was intimidating. Yet she also recognized that this was a chance to grow, to explore her abilities further, and to see how far her music could reach. With the Tycoon's encouragement, she agreed to begin formal lessons. She found herself learning new techniques and discovering nuances in the music that she had never noticed before. Each lesson was a mixture of challenge and excitement as she realized the depth of her own potential. She practiced more than ever, not out of pressure but out of love for the music and a desire to share her gift with others. The mansion, once just a place of work, had become a place of learning and growth, and she embraced it fully. The influence of her music began to extend beyond the mansion walls. The Tycoon arranged for a private concert at a nearby cultural hall, inviting a small audience of people who appreciated the arts. The maid was nervous at first. She had never performed outside the mansion, and the thought of strangers listening to her played heavily on her mind. But when she sat at the piano and let her fingers glide over the keys, all her fears vanished. The music flowed naturally, as it always had, carrying emotion and story in every note. The audience was captivated. They watched in silence, unable to look away, and when the final note lingered in the air, there was a moment of complete stillness before applause erupted. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. People began to recognize her talent more broadly. Invitations to perform came from music schools, small theaters, and private gatherings. She had never sought fame or recognition, but the world could no longer ignore her gift. Each performance was approached with the same dedication, humility, and heart she had always shown. She played not for applause, but to share the beauty and emotion that music allowed her to express. Yet as she moved into new spaces and met new people, she realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a maid with a secret talent. She was a musician whose skill could touch hearts and inspire people. The Tycoon, observing her growth and influence, felt a mixture of pride and amazement. He had started as someone who wanted to humiliate her, who thought he could expose her as ordinary and flawed. Yet in that process he had discovered something far more extraordinary. She had shown him and everyone around her that true talent could not be measured by appearance, status, or expectation. He realized that he had learned far more from her than she could ever have learned from him. Her humility, courage, and dedication were qualities that left a lasting impression on everyone she met. Over time, the maid became a source of inspiration for others in the mansion and beyond. Young staff members began to see her not just as a colleague, but as a model of perseverance and dedication. She quietly encouraged others to pursue their own passions, whether in music, art, or other forms of creativity. People who had once doubted themselves or their abilities found themselves motivated by her example. She had shown them that talent could flourish anywhere, and that with determination and love for what one does, the impossible could become possible. The relationship between the Tycoon and the Maid also transformed. The power dynamics that had once existed were replaced by mutual respect and understanding. He no longer saw her as someone to test or manipulate. He saw her as a person of depth, intelligence, and exceptional talent. He supported her ambitions quietly, providing resources, mentorship, and encouragement without trying to control her path. Their interactions were marked by appreciation and admiration, and through their growing partnership, they discovered that respect and encouragement could be as powerful as authority and wealth. One particularly memorable evening, the Maid performed at a charity event organized by the Tycoon. The room was filled with influential guests, philanthropists, and artists. She played with a depth and emotion that captivated everyone present. By the end of the performance, there were tears, cheers, and heartfelt applause. People approached her afterward, offering congratulations and expressing their amazement. Some asked for private lessons, others simply wanted to hear her play again. She was humbled by the attention, but her focus remained on sharing the music, not on the recognition itself. The impact of her music went beyond personal success. Through her performances, she had begun to show others that talent and passion could create change. Her story, from a humble maid to a recognized musician, became a source of hope for those who had been overlooked or underestimated. People saw in her journey a reminder that dedication, courage, and love for what one does could lead to extraordinary outcomes, no matter where one started. She had become not only a musician, but also a symbol of possibility. Even as she embraced these opportunities, she remained deeply connected to the roots of her journey. She never forgot the quiet hours she had spent practicing alone, nor the courage it had taken to play for the Tycoon that first morning. That moment had set everything in motion. It had revealed her talent, changed her life, and reshaped the perceptions of those around her. She had turned fear into opportunity, embarrassment into triumph, and silence into music that resonated far beyond the walls of the mansion. The Tycoon, too, continued to learn from her. He had begun his journey believing that power and wealth were the ultimate measures of influence. She had shown him that respect, talent, humility, and courage could command a different kind of power, one that moved hearts and inspired change. He had learned that life was full of unexpected gifts and that sometimes those gifts came from places he would never have looked. The experience had reshaped his perspective, teaching him lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. As her reputation grew, the Maid began to dream even bigger. She imagined performing on larger stages, sharing her music with people she could not see, inspiring audiences far beyond the mansion. She sought ways to combine her talent with teaching, wanting to help others discover their own gifts and realize their potential. She wanted to show that music was not just a luxury or a hobby for the wealthy, but a universal language capable of touching lives, breaking barriers, and creating connection. Yet through all this growth and recognition, she never lost her humility. She remembered the long hours spent practicing in secret, the fear of judgment, and the quiet joy of learning for the love of the music itself. She understood that her journey had been shaped not by chance, but by persistence, courage, and a deep love for her craft. She remained kind, patient, and grounded, treating everyone she met with respect regardless of status or wealth. Her character became as inspiring as her music, proving that greatness was not just about skill, but about the way one carried oneself in the world. Eventually, she began performing regularly in public concerts, her name quietly gaining recognition in the world of music. Each performance was met with admiration, and she continued to move audiences with the sincerity and emotion that had always defined her playing. People were drawn not just to her technical skill, but to the authenticity of her expression, the way every note seemed to reflect her soul. She had become a true artist, one whose life story was inseparable from the music she created. Through it all, the Tycoon remained a loyal supporter, never imposing his influence in a way that overshadowed her talent. He had learned the value of encouragement and guidance, of recognizing and nurturing talent rather than trying to control it.